So, with all of the man talking that I did for the past 2 episodes, I feel like maybe I should stop getting on the guy's case for a while and, kind of just open it up. So, this episode is about dating. Even though I might be mentioning the men a little bit, but this episode is about dating. Or should I say lack thereof? Because some of y'all haven't been dating and I'm trying to look at the reasons why and what we can do about it. But before I can get into any of that, I wanted to kick things off with something that might sound a little bit boring, but I figured I might as well put it here. Now, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has been re-elected as president of Russia, extending his 25-year rule as president. Now, to be quite honest, much as this was a thing that I had originally planned, I can go into talking about how the guy won 88% of the votes and people didn't believe in him, but now that I'm reading a bunch of this, it feels a little bit boring. So let me try and switch things up and talk about people dying, because, I guess in terms of its commonality, at least this one isn't particularly common. So 9 people have died and 78 others have been hospitalized after eating sea turtle meat on a remote African island. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this title sounds like it was written by a white person, and I have this very sudden thought that maybe it's a white person, because normally on the list of things that we humans shouldn't eat, you find that it's white people that usually like to try and cross the borders a little bit, because I'd have said, 1 is radioactive materials, 2 is maybe plastics, but I'm sure somewhere along the list you'll probably find sea turtles being listed, and out of everyone, who do you think has the highest likelihood to actually try and eat it, considering all the other things that are on the list that they've eaten?
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
And I'm not saying all of this because I'm like, marine life should be saved or anything. It's not like I don't care, but at the same time, I'm not one of those conservationist types. It's just, honestly, out of the list of things that you probably shouldn't be eating, I tend to think that sea turtle meat should be somewhere there. Because I've never heard of someone saying, let's go try a sea turtle delicacy. And even though you were to say, different people from other cultures eat other meats, Congolese people can eat monkeys, Asian people will eat all sorts of meat and shit. Still, it's something that they've been doing for years, so they probably know how to cook it and avoid all the harmful bits. But no, a bunch of people on an island that wasn't even all that remote, as I'll read in the caption, and they still decided to try turtle meat. I don't know what for. Maybe they thought the more exotic the marine life, the better it'll probably taste. But, clearly we can see the results. But anyways, let me just read the caption real quick as I get into this entire thing. So it says, and I quote, "On a remote African island, 8 children and an adult died while dozens were hospitalized after consuming sea turtle meat, a local delicacy despite its well-known dangers. The incident occurred on the Pemba Island, part of Zanzibar archipelago. Lab tests confirmed the link between the illnesses and the consumption of turtle meat. This tragedy highlights the risks associated with consuming sea turtle meat, which can cause severe food poisoning, including gastrointestinal, neurological, hepatic, and renal toxicity." End quote. Now, considering that someone read all of this shit or probably has some idea that sea turtle meat is not one of those things that you should be looking at as a delicacy, though, like, what, fuck the sea turtle, I won't try and save the ocean by ensuring that there's fewer plastics. I'll just eat the sea turtle so that they will have less of them complaining about the plastics. Like, I've never understood this whole liking of trying super exotic meats. Yes, I know they said that it was a delicacy and all, but I still feel like this probably would have been one of those things that most people would have been like, what, I like playing with sea turtles when they're in the water, not on my plate. But then again, I'm not one of those people. Fortunately, I'm an African person and I like to stick to my very domestic meat, so I'm just gonna leave it at that and begin the podcast in a much better way with a little less death by saying, welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who likes them exotic. Women. Not turtles, not fish, not marine life, just women. He's a man who believed that astrology should have been the study of ass. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode has started with a bit of doom and gloom, but fortunately, it does not remain. I intend on making it particularly lively and, moving past the fact that, a bunch of people died after eating meat. But, sometimes shit happens. Or at least that's what the 78 hospitalized people will have to tell their families when they go back and try to explain why they were busy trying to eat a sea turtle. But anyways, all that said and done, thank you so much for listening to the Break Time podcast. I hope you managed to listen all the way till the end and you pick up something or enjoy yourself as you're listening to this episode. Now, all that said and done, I do have an episode that I need to get into with, like dating as the main topic. But before I can get into that, I want to talk about something that's been particularly important this past week. And for those of you that are expecting me to talk about the whole Diddy allegations and the open secrets about him being gay and having sexual relations with young stars or up and coming musicians and shit, I don't intend on talking about that. I feel like there's something a little bit more important than that. At least if you're in the African continent, more so if you're from Senegal. Now, Senegal recently concluded an election whereby they ended up giving the presidency to a young man known as Bassirou Diomaye Faye. And I'm sure I've probably butchered his name. And to be honest, there's so many interesting things about this guy's story, or at least him as a person and being president, that I can definitely talk about. But the interesting part about it is, there's one thing that so many sites and a bunch of people online, mostly guys, seem to be focusing on with this guy, and it's the fact that he is polygamous. Yes, this man has 2 wives. And one is Christian, the other one is Muslim. And honestly, from the little research that I actually did on the guy and the fact that I actually got to know of him and his being elected into presidency from just the whole polygamy story, I have to admit that I find it particularly odd that people seem to be focusing so much on his being polygamous that they're bypassing the number of accomplishments or records that this guy is actually hitting by him just being president right now. Because from the minimal research that I've done on the guy, this guy is one of the youngest presidents, not just in his country, but in Africa as a whole. He's 44 years old. 44. How many presidents have you heard of that are checking into power in the early to mid 40s? And this guy is one of them. Not just in Africa, even on a global level. Secondly, this guy practically won his election from prison. Granted, yes, it was just him being detained, and he was detained all the way till about the 14th of March, but he was announced as president on like the 26th or the 28th of March, and for the most part, considering that the party that he was supporting was sort of, I think, disbanded or some shit, the guy was technically like independent. You think about it, all of these things are particularly great feats to have happened in a single individual's life, especially considering that this guy is becoming a political leader for the very first time in his life as president, and people are just choosing to focus on the fact that he has 2 wives. Like, why the fuck is that such a big thing? First of all, this guy is Muslim, so not a big issue, and he's in Senegal, whose population is like 90% Muslim, so he has like a limit of like 4 wives. What the hell is getting 2 wives for him such a big issue for? Like, that's fairly standard practice, I believe, for any people that have some version of a Muslim background. Although, to be honest, I feel like the more interesting part about this being shared is that the people that were sharing this the most were actually guys. It was guys that were busy sending this to each other. Oh, Senegal has a new president and he's polygamous. And honestly, I've never understood most guys' fascination with polygamy and the idea of having multiple wives. And I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but I feel like the whole idea of it is a little bit overrated. Maybe for a lot of guys, the concept of having multiple women that you could be with, that you don't have to hide from your original partner or from your first partner, and it's like acceptable and legal according to law, according to culture, and according to religion, seems like a particularly good idea. But to be quite honest, at least from the way I look at it, there's no real logical benefit, minus the fact that you have more than one sexual partner, for polygamy to actually be a good idea. Because when you look at it, there's probably going to be more of a fight for resources after you die. There's the issue of constant competition between the wives and, preferential treatment with the children. Also, in terms of childhood development, it's usually better with monogamous 2-parent households as opposed to polygamous households. Like, I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. I'm just saying that you can't really see any real logical benefits, or at least I can't see them, for polygamy. But you find that guys are so into the whole idea and they're like, men are supposed to be polygamous. Yet, for a lot of the time, people actually forget that polygamy is in and of itself quite a bit of work. And the relationships probably aren't as deep as, some monogamous relationships tend to be, in terms of the vulnerability and the feelings and the safe space that you sort of have when you're with your partner or partners in this particular case. But then again, maybe it's just a me thing, but I figured, considering that people are just talking about the fact that this guy has more than one wife, I feel like we should at least mention his accomplishments as a person and not just fixate ourselves on the very gossipy subject of who he gets to fuck every night. But then again, that's just a me thing. I'm gonna leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, if there's one thing that I've noticed of late whenever I go online, more so to Reddit forums, but even in other forums as well, it's the fact that people talk about how, there's no good women, there's no decent guys, there's no good guys that are out here, and the dating market is full of shit people. And it's something that I've seen so much, whether it's on online forums, whether it's people talking on Twitter, that I've honestly come to the conclusion that most of these people actually are mostly hidden, and they don't come out unless they need to, and they don't hit on each other, and they don't meet each other, which is why we don't have people talking about, good partners in the dating market. And sometime last week while I was on Reddit, I saw a post which kind of forced me to try and think about the why and the how a lot of these really good people ended up in this situation. So the title of the post itself reads, "Someone asked why so many decent men are single. Well, I want to know, where do you all hang out?" End quote. And when I read the question, it did make me kind of think about it. So the person says, and I quote, "Trying to meet decent men naturally. Where are you all at? 25-year-old female here. Tried dating apps, but it feels like it's where all freshly broken up people go to try to distract themselves. And I don't like the idea of being a rehab center. Haven't met anyone at church, plus I go there for other reasons than meeting someone. Hehe. At work conferences, it's tough because I need to keep it all professional." End quote. Okay, so I read this post and I was like, you know what? There's definitely some issues that we need to look at here. And I think the most glaringly obvious one is the dating apps problem, but there's also a bar/church problem, and I feel like there's also an approaching problem that we need to talk about before I can get to how we can kind of get around this and where you could possibly find people, because I'm sure there's some people that might actually be interested in knowing where you can find good partners, or at least some idea of it. And to kind of start things off, let me go into the dating apps problem, because the Reddit user actually did start by talking about how she tried dating apps, but it feels like it's where all freshly broken up people go to try to distract themselves. And if I was to think about it like that, it's probably true, but at the same time, I feel like to add on to that, it's just full of people that are practicing hookup culture. And to be honest, even though I'm not a particularly big participant or practicing person when it comes to using dating apps, I know for a fact that even the dating apps themselves aren't particularly good for dating, and if anything, it incentivizes because it profits from hookup culture. And if you think I'm lying, just think of Tinder for a little bit, alright? People, like to refer to Tinder as like the number one hookup site. It's not even a dating site, blah, blah. It's full of people that are just trying to shag. And when you kind of think about it, if you were someone that owned a dating app, would you want people to go get into relationships and then leave the apps? Or would it be more profitable if you had people coming back because the relationships didn't work out or they're particularly short term? Because if you can have them coming back because they want better quality partners, or better searches, or at least sort of better odds so that they can get better quality people, then you bring them back in, have them deal with a couple of low quality people, try and upsell them on a premium plus program or some shit like that, and then they come back and they get a better quality or supposed better quality because they believe that because they've paid, they'll probably get more searches, have access to better women or men, and that will probably increase their chances of actually finding a good mate to date. And to be honest, for the most part, if you have hookup culture happening in the background of all of that, hookup culture probably helps it a lot more than just people who are just genuinely dating. So I can get why hookup culture is so prevalent on dating apps. Now granted, it's not like Tinder's the only one. There's Bumble, Hinge, Plenty of Fish, True Flutter, but at the end of the day, they all kind of suffer from the biggest plagues of dating apps, which is the superficiality that makes hookup culture and short-term dating so prevalent, which is people focusing on looks, people focusing on height, people focusing on how someone took their photos to make them look good, and it completely bypasses the fact that none of those features actually contribute to long-term relationship success. But then again, it's just a me thing. That's something that I kind of looked at and I was like, what, that probably isn't a good idea. And maybe there's some people that are a little bit more old school that would prefer something a little bit more face-to-face than trying to find someone to date online. So you'd probably want to go and approach people. But the moment you also think of that, you realize that the places that we always believed were the best to go and pick up people from aren't actually all that good. Like the old antiquated idea of, you go to the club and you can pick up a babe from there, or you go to the club to meet new people, or you go to church to meet people. Like maybe you go to a different church, or you start going to church a little bit more often. Like those ideas of meeting people are not only old, but they've also started producing some of the most low quality results that we'd probably think of. And I'll even talk about it from the guy's side as well as the girl side, because I think there's not that many girls that'll be like, I'm looking for a guy, let me go to the club. Most of them will probably go towards the church end, so let me start with the guys in the club. So you find a guy goes to the bar or the club and he's like, I'm trying to pick up a couple of babes. First of all, yes, you might find a couple of fire babes, but for the most part, it's not like they're trying to find a relationship at the club. So you find that a lot of them are probably more predisposed towards some sort of short-term fling. And even though you could find a good one, there's a pretty good chance that if she came to the club, she came with her friends, and all of the friends are female, and they're all going to sit in one sort of cocoon area together, one table together, and they won't be interacting with any guys. And they'll probably have one or two of their friends at the end to sort of ward off a bunch of the guys, because they aren't trying to get picked up by a bunch of guys or by a bunch of random men. So at that point, you kind of realize that it's not like you're really trying to find a wife at the club. You're not really trying to pick up a shorty that you'd want to spend the rest of your life with or have some version of a long-term or serious relationship if you're looking for them at the club. And maybe you can switch over and go to church, because church has always been known to have really good women, and these are people that serve the Lord, and they have Christian values, so they're good. But unfortunately, the church also tends to have its fair share of bad apples, and they usually tend to come in two batches. One batch is usually the very judgmental types, that can be a little bit hypocritical on the side, and the reformed hoes. So for the most part, you have the option of choosing someone who is possibly about as judgmental and as uptight as a virgin nun, or you have the option of choosing someone who gave some of her best years to dick that did not want to stay with her and is now choosing to come back to the Lord because she wants a man to spend the rest of her life with. And don't get me wrong, it's not like these are the only women that are in church. There's particularly good ones, even though a good number of them, by the time you're in your late 20s, early 30s, are probably already married or in some version of a relationship. It's just that a good number of the women that do end up staying single for particularly long in church and are very open to the idea of, meeting someone and dating them do kind of fall within these two categories a lot of the time. Although when you switch the genders, you tend to have a particularly different problem. Now, I did mention that, the whole going to the bar, going to the club to find a good long-term mate isn't a great idea that women tend to take up. But if you were to tell them to now come to church, they also stand to find their own set of problems in guys, because you find that there's the uptight and judgmental ones, and then there's the ones that you find a lot of girls seem to like, a lot of girls seem to get close to, but no one ever really wants to commit to, probably because after a couple of bad experiences with one or two or a few of those women, they suddenly realize that this guy's a problem and they'd much rather avoid him like the plague. Now, of course, like I said, doesn't mean that that's the case for every single man that's in church and single and has been single for a long time. But for a lot of them, this is particularly common because it's either that or they already have a girlfriend or a wife at that point that they've probably been going to church with for a couple of years, or that they ended up meeting at church. And so because you've gone around that entire issue, now you find that if the online space for dating doesn't seem to have particularly good options, if the offline, the more physical side of it doesn't seem to have particularly good options, you find that both genders get to a point where they're like, the market's full of shit people out here, and maybe dating isn't for me. Or maybe they're like, you know what, my person will come when the time is right. And they practically just resign themselves to not trying to get into the dating market or find someone to date. So it's literally a case of homework, maybe go to the supermarket, maybe go to church if, that's something that they choose to stick to, and then go back home again. So for the most part, you find that it's like now they've kind of gone into hibernation mode, or you could call it hiding, whereby they're not trying to put themselves out there, they're not trying to date or anything like that. And at that point in time, now that's when people start asking, how comes you don't approach people? How comes you're not going out there? And they're busy saying that the options aren't all that good. And as they say that, for a while they stay home, they don't try to get social, they don't try to meet new people, and because they're stuck in their cocoons, they kind of start falling into what I look at as the approaching problem, whereby now these people aren't going out there to approach people. They'll go for social events, they'll go and they'll interact with people that they know or they've known. It's not like they're putting themselves in a position where they can be approached, at least for the women and all. And it just kind of puts people in this zone where it's like nothing is happening. They're not trying to date, they're not trying to put themselves in a position where someone would want to date them, can actually shoot their shot. And it's like now there's this blank zone for them. And for the guys, they can come back and say, we don't want to be called creeps. We don't want to go through the hell that is being rejected or being treated like shit because they're not interested in us, or the look and the actions that come with a certain amount of disgust because they're not interested in you. And I would probably agree with them and be like, yeah, that's true. But does it mean that every single woman won't be interested in you? Do you think that every single woman will find you to be a creep? Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like these things don't hurt our feelings, and yes, we're supposed to be able to take rejection, but everyone has a threshold. Although one of the most interesting things that I've learned over the years is that threshold actually increases the more you practice because it hurts you a lot less. Meaning that your chances of securing a partner actually increase quite a bit as you start to learn more about interacting with women, and rejection sort of becomes a non-issue for you. But then again, the women that probably could be approached, that would be particularly good mate partners, also aren't leaving the house all that much. So where exactly are they going to be approached at the same time? And now we have another problem of trying to bring the other side towards the more social end so that they can be approached, because there's a lot of women that literally just go to work and go home, besides them probably going to meet a friend at a cafe, or probably going for dinner, or maybe the occasional event with friends where they only stick together as friends. And at that point, you can clearly see that even though one side or the other might be particularly willing, it's not like the other side is presently available so that they can be approached or they can approach. So we now have this issue where there's good sets of partners on both ends, but they're not presently available to be approached or to approach because either they're giving up on the dating market or they're not putting themselves out there. So the question is, how do we kind of circumnavigate all of this and get to a position or a point where it's more efficient to actually meet people? And to kind of answer that, I found probably one of the most interesting comments on Reddit that actually kind of answered this so well, because the commenter said, and I quote, "I was once told, imagine the hobby you wish your partner would do, now go and find that hobby group and hang out." End quote. Now, for example, if you want a more reserved woman who probably would choose to read as opposed to go out to the club, maybe joining a book club might be a particularly good idea. Say, if you're looking for someone that probably has an interest in, say, comic books or the MCU or DCU, maybe going for some sort of Comic-Con or nerdy event where you might find female cosplayers might actually be a particularly good idea. Maybe it's not just about going to the club or going to a bar or going to a church. that you can find a particularly good mate to actually try some sort of serious relationship with. And honestly, I feel like that's kind of where you need to start going if you're a guy. Like, go and look at some of the events where you'd have more women in there. So, for example, like I said, book clubs, or if you want someone who's a little bit more into gaming and into doing nerdy shit or comic books, then maybe going for a Comic-Con or a gaming event might actually be a little bit more suited to you. If maybe you want someone who's into adventure, then going for like group camping trips with strangers wouldn't be such a bad idea. Because if I'm not wrong, I think they still have events like that. And if you're interested in women that also like to be a little bit more outdoorsy and go for events, try and go for the ones that are a little bit more clothing themed or costume themed, because women do like to dress up. Either way, you need to kind of think outside the typical parameters of how to meet people. Otherwise, you'll be stuck busy talking about how you want to meet new people, but all you ever do is just go to the office and go home and go to the supermarket to get your groceries. And to kind of conclude all of this, let me just say that there's a lot of good people out here that are looking for good people as well to do life with, or to have some version of a serious relationship, or just try something long term with someone who's particularly reasonable. I know the dating market looks like it's a pile of shit right now, whether you're looking at it on the online side or whether you're looking at it from the more physical, or should I say offline, real-time side. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of good people that are in the dating market, but also some that might be trying to leave the dating market. So either way, as long as you put yourself out there and don't feel like you're particularly desperate by saying that you're looking for love, or you're looking for someone, I think that your chances probably shoot up a hell of a lot more than when you keep quiet, go to the office, come back to the house and just sit and read a book or watch a bunch of series or movies, or just go to the bar and drink with a couple of your buddies. And fellas, go back to hitting on women. I know rejection is there, but I feel like you could probably still stomach it, at least in today's day and age, at least in this part of the world for the most part. Although, then again, that is a topic for a different episode, and I might be wrong about a bunch of other things on this one, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. And on X, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.